Raleigh, you spoke today about the challenge of bringing the gifts of the faith, the traditions, the practices, the word of the faith, and preaching or otherwise, to several generations at once. And that's caused you to reflect on exactly how you can preach or teach in a way that is enlivening across generations. Do you want to tell us some of what your thoughts on that have been?
Yeah. Those of us who are practiced in the faith, particularly those of us who are Christian public leaders, have a whole background of education in the faith, learning the faith, of practicing the faith. We have our own grammar. We have our own shorthand that we know so well and matters deeply to us. Today, especially now, regularly, not only young people, but their parents and grandparents have not been introduced to that grammar, that background, those narratives that add meaning and frame the deep values and the deep meanings that are expressed in this great language of the Christian faith. Consequently, preaching, consequently worship, consequently the mutual conversation and consolation of God's people as they speak with one another is a monologue. It's one-sided. This was brought home to me particularly by a young woman who was in my confirmation class who said to me as she handed back sermon notes, which she had taken and was supposed to take for the class, Pastor Martinson, on Sunday morning you get up and hand out all these empty pop cans. On Wednesday I hand a few back to you, and nothing much of significance ever passes between us. Well, talk about a powerful critique on the part of a modern poet, using a pop can as a metaphor for what I was doing. This was the most important thing in my life, and I obviously wasn't communicating. So we started an agreement in which she and some of her friends would listen to sermons, and then we would unpack them. And what I learned in the unpacking is when I used a word like forgiveness, or even the word like God, as she said, it sounds like it's a 3-syllable word when you use it. Get real, man. As we talked, we started developing languages for these words. Like, what does forgiveness mean? Is it, in fact, recognizing together that some harm has been done here? Someone has hurt someone, and that the hurt matters, and that the hurt has, in fact, ruptured a relationship, perhaps, or at least damaged the relationship. What are the words that would carry the content of the damage? What are the words that would carry the feelings? What are the words that would describe the change in the behavior? And we worked together, and she gave me language. So after practicing and working with them, about 6 weeks or 2 months or so, one of the elderly women in the church said, as she was leaving church that Sunday, she said to me, "So, Pastor, your preaching has changed." And I thought now she was going to get down on the pastor. And then she said, "You know, you now talk about that which matters in a language that we can understand from a point of view that makes a difference." So what I find in the challenges today, in some ways, is a challenge of translation. It's a challenge in listening and knowing the existential realities of young people themselves. What language do they use to answer the question, who am I, and does life matter, and what's a future? And to pick up on that language, what kind of illustrations, what kind of life experiences shape and form those? And once knowing those, how does one then go about shifting one's way of speaking out of the tradition in which God's story and their story in fact encounter one another? And I've discovered in the process that deep listening is critical. Spending time and being in dialogue and working things out together so that the preaching exercise becomes a shared dialogue that continues, goes back and forth. I've also discovered that young people have the capacity to even preach themselves via what I would call witness. Rather than preaching being only proclamation, by during a sermon, just walking into the congregation, asking one of them to stand and interviewing them. I most certainly, when I do that, let them know that I'm going to do so, and we'll give them a bit of, if you will, a heads up. But usually, right on the spot, they're prone to just say what's on their mind. And when I've done so, I've often gotten an adult in the congregation to say, that's me. This person spoke out of my own experience as well. So one of the challenges here, I think, first is to shift proclamation to include witness, and to shift the preaching exercise or the proclamation exercise from being a one-way street or a monologue to becoming a dialogue, and perhaps becoming even an integrative interaction or inclusion of the congregation in the process of exploring God's Word together. And even as I've spoken about this in preaching, this is also something that can be done in terms of designing worship, working the prayers, and thinking also just about how you sit down and have a conversation with a young person about faith itself.